An Examination of Revolutions from an Epistemological Perspective by Rachel Hoffman. Hi, I'm Rachel, and today I'm going to address revolution as explained by philosophers such as Hobbes, Locke, Kant, and Marx. I'm going to start by defining what is revolution and what is not revolution. The definition of revolution is an attempt to replace an existing government with another government that involves a total change of one form of constitution to another, or the alteration of an existing constitution. Revolution is not defined as resistance, which is civil disobedience in the form of protest, demonstrations, riots, or boycotts. Rebellion, rejecting all forms of governmental authority. Secession, the act of a political group withdrawing from a government and claiming sovereignty. Now that I've defined exactly what revolution is, I'm going to discuss the stages of a revolution, with reference to Crane Britton, a historian who wrote The Anatomy of a Revolution, which is a book which discusses the stages that a revolution typically goes through and the precursors to a revolution and what happens after a revolution occurs. These are the stages of a revolution as referenced from The Anatomy of a Revolution by Crane Britton. Stage 1 is pre-revolutionary. Budget deficits and shortfalls occur, excessive taxation, economic discrimination, and/or neglect of certain socio-economic groups. Class discrimination, widespread ineptness and ineffectiveness of governments. Scholars, intellectuals, and others associated with academia no longer endorse the current government in power, and the leader is ineffective and attempts to enforce policy effectless, even when force and violence are used. Stage 2 is the uprising. What happens here is that a financial and economic collapse occurs. There are protests, demonstrations, and boycotts. There's the moderate political parties gain more traction. You'll see a lot more activity revolving around those groups. Revolutionists start to gather in mass secretly. A mob mentality may dominate. The fight for justice changes from full of hope for a new future to vengeful with the possibility of intended acts of violence on the horizon. Stage 3 is revolution. The revolutionists take control. Revolutionists start to behave in unexpected ways due to the revolutionary environment. And this occurrence creates radicals within the movement. Moderate political parties forcibly removed from office, possibility of civil war and or foreign wars. Terror may be used by radicals within the movement to control the population. And opposing parties and those seen as not in support of the revolution may be oppressed, imprisoned, tortured, or killed by the radicals. Within the revolutionary regimes, conflict of leadership develops and the power struggles ensue. Britton inserts, the revolution, like Saturn, devours its children. Stage 4 is the Thermidor. And what this is, it's basically like a relief from the radicalism that has just occurred. The goal has been achieved for a revolutionary state. So it's relief from radicalism ruled by tyranny. Radicals are removed, oftentimes by means of violence. An autocrat, tyrant, or dictator takes control. This period varies in intensity, and in some historical revolutions, this period and the ruler in place is clearly identified. In other post-revolutionary states, it is less visible to the onlooker. A return of quality of life compared to the active revolutionary state, citizens display nationalistic behaviors. What I'm going to discuss next is philosophical viewpoints on revolution and the relevancy they hold for that. What What did philosophers think? These are some philosophers' views on revolution. First we have Thomas Hobbes, 1588 to 1679. Hobbes argued that revolution is unjustifiable except in the case of explicit implied lethal harm. He states that when lack of government exists, humans tend to fall back on aims on behavior to dominate others out of self-preservation, out of rationality, thus leading to the frequent occurrence of the lethal use of violence in a revolutionary state. I would say Hobbes is definitely against revolution. Next we have John Locke, 1632 to 1704. Locke argues that citizens should be able to reject the government in place for any reason. He believed that revolution only occurs when citizens have suffered greatly at the hands of governments. Locke did not address the occurrence of revolution when a minority social group has their rights violated and seeks to revolt. In his works, he only addressed the majority. He also did not address the morality of revolution or the possibility that violence may occur during political upheaval. And political means seem to justify any violent or immoral action taken in the name of revolution. I would say John Locke is definitely for revolution, but he does not address some key issues about the morality of revolution and the damage and destruction that revolution can cause. He also doesn't address what happens when a minority social group is being abused by the government and needs to protest that. Next is Immanuel Kant, 1724 to 1804. Kant states that revolution must be agreed upon by the majority, but only recognized by respected political leaders that can call for revolution on behalf of the people. Since the goal of revolution is to overthrow the government and a supreme political figure is essentially an agent for the state, revolution can therefore never be justified according to Kant. So Kant was not for revolution. He didn't see any reason for it, and if there was a reason for it, it was impossible. Next is Karl Marx, 1818 to 1883. Marx advocated for a workers' revolution, which involved proletarians, workers, staging a revolt against the bourgeoisie, capitalists to end alienation brought on by disassociation of workers from their trade due to capitalistic means of production, which robbed workers of not only their rightfully earned wages, but their dignity and happiness as well. Marx was definitely for revolution, and most of his works advocated directly for a revolution to occur in the near future. It was something that was very important for him to protest the state of the government and what the capitalists were doing to the workers and to people of lower socioeconomic statuses. He wanted revolution, he wanted liberation, and he wanted a communistic state which involved everybody working for the same goal and sharing everything. And throughout history we've seen that is not successful realistically. So while his intentions were good, it was not something that has really ever been able to be done with much success. So far I have covered the definition of revolution, the differences between a revolution and a secession, a rebellion, and a resistance, and we've gone over the stages of a revolution and some notable philosophers which have some very insightful thoughts about revolution and theories. And I think it's very important that that's discussed in today's political and social climate, and that we keep informed about what's happening with us and realize it's not random. This all follows a pattern which has repeated itself throughout history. So we need to know what to expect next and what exactly is going on around us. And what better way to do that than to study our philosophers.